Meeting of the City of Waynesboro Planning Commission for Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. And Bobby, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Does somebody want to make a motion to adopt the agenda for this evening's meeting?
I'll make a motion that we adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting of Tuesday, December 20th, 2022.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Everyone in favor of adopting the agenda?
Aye.
Motion carries. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at the minutes from the meeting held November 22nd, 2022?
Yes, ma'am.
Does somebody want to make a motion to accept those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes from the meeting of November 22nd, 2022.
Everyone in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Everyone not in favor? Minutes are approved. We have a public comment period for items not on the agenda. I don't think we have any public comments, do we? We can move right into our public hearing for a conditional use permit application by David Elmore of Elmore Properties LLC to modify the mandatory build-to requirements in the CB Central Business District for a property located at 222 South Wayne Avenue, Waynesboro, tax map number 45-2-21. Allison, thank you.
Good evening. So this application is for a conditional use permit for 222 South Wayne Avenue. And just quick overview, conditional use permits allow for a case-by-case review of uses, which may be but are not always compatible with the neighboring uses. In order to approve the conditional use permit, the City Council must find that the proposed use is consistent with good zoning practice and will have no more adverse effect on the health, safety, or comfort of persons living or working in the area, and will be no more detrimental economically or otherwise to property or improvements in the surrounding area than any use generally permitted within that district. So the location of the subject parcel is 222 South Wayne Avenue. It's about midway down the block between Federal and 11th Street. It's that currently vacant parcel in the center of the block. The post office of Wells Fargo is directly to the north of it. Then you have the bookkeeping and management systems building and the Gorsuch building directly to the south, and Fishburne across the street. The subject parcel is zoned CB, which is our central business district, and the applicant is requesting a modification of the build-to line requirement within that central business district. The applicant has submitted a site plan for review with the intent of building a new building on that vacant parcel, and the build-to requirement issue was identified during that site plan review process. So I'm going to try and explain what a build-to line is, and then I'll show some pictures which will hopefully help clarify what may be confusing about the text. But a build-to line is the area that runs along the property line in which the building facade must be built to. The intent is to create a consistent street wall and sort of frame the street to create an aesthetically pleasing space. A good example of this, in effect, is the downtown blocks on West Main Street. I put down Church Street and Arch Avenue. Probably the best example is between Wayne and Arch. And our ordinance defines the build-to line as being the front and street side property line to which a minimum percentage of the building's facade along the front and street side yards, if any, must be built. In our ordinance, new buildings within the CB district must have 70% of their facade built to that build-to line. And that line is basically the city's right-of-way line. So it would be right sort of at the back of the sidewalk in many cases in the downtown. So here's the first picture. This is that 2 blocks between Church Street and Arch Avenue. The city's right-of-way line is that sort of yellow line right at where the buildings currently front. And so this is sort of prime example of that build-to line in effect. It's creating that nice sort of closed-in space. I think it sort of resembles a very classic downtown feel. You know, the buildings are right there. It's very human scaled. It's very, I can't think of the word I want to use, but anyways. So this is the sort of thing that Build 2 line is meant to encourage. The location of the subject parcel is on that block between Federal Street and 11th Street. And as you can see in this picture, all of the buildings, north and south, are set back from the right-of-way line. Again, is that sort of that yellow line. You can sort of see it right here. All of those buildings are kind of set back. And so, in effect, these buildings more than likely existed prior to the 2011 zoning ordinance revisions, which is when this Build 2 line was put in place. And so these buildings, since they predated that, sort of created their own street wall, in effect, being slightly set back. And you can see that they all sort of complement each other down that block. The site plan that was submitted by the applicant shows the building being sited in a way that would complement the existing street wall, the existing buildings. The setback of the proposed building on the site plan would not be out of place with any of the other buildings along that block, essentially, which is why staff doesn't feel that this request is unreasonable in this case to modify it. So, as I said, the proposed location of the new building complements the setback of the existing buildings, which makes this request to modify not require that 70% Build 2 line on the city's right-of-way, not to make that a requirement in this case, to allow that conditional use permit. So staff is recommending approval with the following condition, that the placement of any new structures that are located on this parcel complement the setback of the neighboring structures to ensure that nice existing street wall. And that is all I have, and ready for any questions that you may have.
Commissioners, do we have any questions?
No?
Okay, so I can open the public hearing.
You gotta whack that hand.
I will. I just gotta get to my cheat sheet, the right place. Okay, so I'm opening the public hearing for a conditional use permit application by David Elmore of Elmore Properties LLC to modify the mandatory Build 2 requirements in the CB Central Business District for a property located at 222 South Wayne Avenue, Waynesboro, tax map number 45-2-21. So anyone who wants to come speak is the applicant here?
I'm here with, representing the applicant.
Okay. Do we feel like we need anyone to approach, or do we?
Nah, there's.
Okay, do we have any comments that have been emailed or?
Nope, we did not receive any comments or any
Okay.
notification from, or any feedback from our notification related to the adjacent property owner letters or
Okay.
otherwise.
Okay, well, since I think I can close the public hearing. Okay, so what do we think, staff? Commissioners?
I'm looking at the plan here, and it matches all the other buildings on the street. I don't
Yeah.
Seems
know
like
why
a
we
pretty
wouldn't
easy,
approve that.
Yeah, that makes
seems like a
makes
pretty
sense.
easy.
Yeah.
To force them up on the sidewalk would make less sense than.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And we do things that make sense here. I mean. Okay, so, we're good, hold on, let me just make sure. Someone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the conditional use permit application by David Elmore of Elmore Properties LLC to modify the mandatory Build 2 requirements in the CB Central Business District for property located at 222 South Wayne Avenue, Waynesboro, Virginia, tax map number 45-2-21, with the conditions set forth by staff.
I'll second.
Everyone in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Okay, now we're hopping right along here tonight, making LSN get up and down. We're here for public hearing number 2 For an amendment to City Code, Chapter 98 zoning ordinance to add a new primary use for temporary special events. He's going to miss it.
Yes, so this is a zoning text amendment for temporary special events. The applicant requested that the zoning ordinance be amended to allow for short-term special events. Short-term special events are smaller scale events, something like weddings, workshops, seminars, that sort of activity. The applicant runs a bed and breakfast and wishes to hold these types of smaller scale events several times a year. And our ordinance doesn't currently have a provision in place to permit such activities. What our ordinance does have in place right now in section 98-4.7.6 is temporary outdoor events, which allows for one event within a 6-month period, and these are for very large-scale events, festivals, fairs, dog shows, other types of large-scale events, concerts. And then also the staff has received inquiries in the past from others that are interested in holding these smaller scale events. But the applicant is the first one to put an application for it. So these are the 6 criteria that need to be considered when considering an amendment to the zoning ordinance. I don't think I'll read all of them, but those are the one here that is particularly important is the extent to which the proposed text amendment represents a new idea not considered in the existing ordinance, which is the case here. So to get into the proposed amendment, we are proposing adding a new commercial use to the ordinance's use table and to permit that use in all districts by a conditional use permit. We believe that this would be the best way to allow this use, in part because events and then the sites vary. And this would give us the ability to evaluate each application according to its own specific event type and then site. And we believe it also will help ensure that the events do not adversely affect the surrounding properties, and that attendees can safely participate as well. This is the purpose and definition statement that we, staff came up with for this temporary special events. And I'll just read it. That might be the best way to describe it. But the purpose of this section is to address temporary small-scale special events that may occur at more frequent intervals and be of a smaller size than temporary outdoor events regulated by section 98-4.7.6. Temporary special events are short-term events that may be held by nonprofit organizations or for-profit businesses multiple times a year. Events typically last 1 day or up to 3 days. Temporary special events can include, but are not limited to, workshops, conferences, seminars, weddings, dinners, banquets, private parties, and other similar activities. This section establishes the criteria for the approval or disapproval of such temporary special events and provides the requirements for the conduct of such uses. For large-scale temporary outdoor events, including but not limited to carnivals, circuses, festivals, and fairs, refer to section 98-4.7.6. So that is the purpose statement of the new use. And this is starting to get into our requirements for the use. We are suggesting that they be permitted by a conditional use permit. And because of that, we will be requiring that all the conditional use permit application requirements be met, in addition to several additional criteria that we believe are required for this particular use, the events. So we will be requiring that they submit as part of that conditional use permit application a concept plan, information about how they're handling parking and access, a description of the types of events to be held, the number and the approximate time span, the estimated number of participants and the hours of operation, how they plan to address providing adequate water and sanitation facilities, the description of any temporary or permanent structures or facilities, including information about the size, a safety plan containing details regarding emergency preparedness and emergency response plans, services, medical services, law enforcement and security services, and similar details necessary for ensuring the safety of attendees and the general public. Also be asking for a lighting plan, which provides for safe lighting without excessive glare into residential areas or streets. And then finally, a description and planned use of sound, including but not limited to the amplified music, disc jockeys, and bands. So in addition to all of those submittals as part of the conditional use application, we also put in place or are proposing regulations surrounding permanent and temporary structures, and then also temporary facilities. And first, for the permanent structures, we are categorizing these as structures such as pavilions or barns, types of structures normally used for these types of events. We are permitting those, but we are requiring that any new permanent structures that are installed or constructed go through all the required zoning, building, and fire department approvals, and any permits are obtained as necessary. This is the same with any pre-existing structures that might be on the property, making sure they have any necessary permits, and then also any certificates of occupancy or anything else that might be necessary from the building, zoning, and fire departments. And then finally, for the permanent structures, any structures that are constructed will conform to the regulations of that particular zoning district. And then as far as temporary structures go, we are classifying these as structures such as tents or stages. And they are also subject to any applicable laws or regulations. And then we also have in place a couple additional regulations. We are considering temporary structures to be those that are erected for 180 days or less, and that's about a 6-month period. They will be prohibited in front yards, and then also must be 20 feet from any rear or side property lines. And then again, no temporary structures shall be installed or constructed without all the required zoning, building, or fire department approvals or permits, whichever might be applicable. And then finally, for the temporary facilities, again, we would be permitting these in connection with an approved temporary special events conditional use permit. These sorts of facilities are, portable toilets or trash receptacles. And we also put in place a couple additional regulations for those. They will be required to be screened from view from adjacent parcels and any street by topography, structures, or landscaping. They will be prohibited in front yards and also must be 20 feet from any rear or side property lines. They must be removed within 3 days of the end of each event. And then finally, again, temporary facilities cannot be installed or constructed unless all the necessary approvals and permits are obtained as applicable. And then finally, we have a couple additional, or one additional requirement is that temporary or permanent signage advertising a temporary special event is also permitted with the conditional use permit. And we have suggested limiting these to a maximum of 22 square feet with a maximum height of 8 feet. And then finally, any additional conditions that might be deemed necessary according to that particular event type or site. Staff is supporting the approval of this zoning text amendment, in part because over the last several years, smaller scale events such as these, agritourism, that sort of activity, has become extremely popular. And it's possible that the lack of popularity back in 2011, when the zoning ordinance was last updated, could be the reason why these types of smaller events weren't included in that zoning ordinance revision. These were not popular enough at that time. Staff believes that permitting the types of uses through a conditional use permit allows the city the flexibility to review and recommend conditions for each application according to the event types they wish to hold along with their particular site. And again, helps to ensure that these events do not adversely affect the surrounding properties and that the attendees can safely participate. So that is the overview of the new ordinance, and I'm ready for any questions that you may have about it.
I'd like to ask, what are the primary events, or what's the plans? I mean, what are the events that you're primarily going to be holding? I know exactly where that property is, and it's away from most neighbors. There is this, I think William Perry, though, is behind the property. So I was just wondering what the events would be, and even in what time of day or night you think that you will be having special events, especially the ones that are outside.
So just to clarify, this, it is a two-step process that we're talking about right now. So this is to amend the zoning ordinance to even allow it be a possibility that someone come forward and ask for a conditional use permit. So we have been working with the applicant, and they do have plans to come forward if this is approved and to actually make an application for a conditional use permit. So it's kind of a two-step, if that makes sense. We have to have the ordinance allow it first, and then once the ordinance allows it, then they would be able to come in and submit those very specific things like hours of operation, number of events a year, maybe relative sizes that they envision. And it would be during that public hearing, when they're coming forward with that actual request, that you as the planning commission could recommend conditions be placed on it, and that council would ultimately determine what conditions be placed on it. So certainly, when they speak, they can answer some of those questions, but this would not be to say that they can have that use at that location, just that they could come back in and actually make an application for it at a later time.
So this is sort of for anybody to make.
Yeah, and that's something, to keep in mind also,
Sort of a
that,
bigger, this is a little higher level decision before we get down to the.
and it would be for the city as a whole, so, that's the, agritourism is obviously much more common in the county.
Right.
But there are certain properties in the city that we think, lend itself to this type. But then also to keep in mind, it could be other businesses that maybe want to do some more events.
Right.
And would also like to come forward with some kind of application. So it kind of would vary based on the property.
This would require for each event a conditional use permit application, correct?
No, so if an individual came forward and said, we're interested in doing, weddings, showers, family reunions, they would kind of let you know up front. And then there could be conditions placed on the number a year. So they wouldn't have to come forward for every event. They could come forward and say, we want a permit to have, a maximum of 200 people at events, and we would like to have 6 a year or something like that. And it would be your recommendation to council, depending on the property and maybe the potential impacts or the size of the property and all of those things, where you could place some kind of limiting conditions on it if you felt that it was necessary. But they would not have to come back for
each and
every
every
single event. It would be, maybe a number a year they would be permitted, and that would be part of the conditions, and then that would become an enforcement issue, essentially for our staff, if there were complaints, to kind of go out and monitor, are they compliant with the conditions that were put in place?
So this has to go to city council for final approval anyway, right?
Yes, so this would be, again, that two-step process. So city council would say whether they think we should amend the ordinance to even allow a conditional use permit for these types of uses. And if they were to approve it, then our applicant could come back forward and actually make an application for their specific use, and then any others in the city that would be interested in a similar type use could also come in and apply. And those would be before you and council for final decision.
And these are for specifically businesses and for businesses to be using their space for these types of events, or does this also apply to a family that has a 2 to 5 acre property that they want to host a family reunion at once a year? Like, how far does this go?
Yes, that gets tricky, land
Right,
use.
right.
But typically when it comes to an individual's private property where they're kind of holding some kind of event, this would not apply. I guess it could get into a gray area if it became something that someone did, all the time and it was becoming an issue. But no, we, typically think of it more if it's being used more consistently and potentially kind of more of a for-profit basis and nonprofit, but in some kind of fundraising capacity or something more, happening more consistently. But no, if you wanted to host a wedding on your property for your family, that would be one thing. If it turned into more of an advertising thing and, neighbors were saying, oh, they're doing weddings every weekend, then we would likely be reaching out to say, you should really come forward and apply for a conditional use permit, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I have, I did not read 98-47.6, although I did pull it up on my phone just now. Are small-scale special events otherwise defined in that chapter? I mean, would we be giving license for hypothetically gigantic events? I mean, obviously, they'll be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, but if staff recommends a future CUP at some point that says up to 1,000 people, and all of a sudden, you can imagine where the hypothetical is going, right? So I would be concerned about small scale, sort of the vagueness of that term and how it might be abused in the future, since it's not otherwise defined in the code section.
And so with the one section that limits to, one per year or one per 6 months or whatever, and that was kind of the larger festival, concert, kind of fair type things where we thought, if someone wants to come forward and get that permit for something, it's likely going to only be once a year. It's like a big event. For these, it really is up to the discretion of council in terms of, like, they always have the ability to place a condition on the number of participants. In some localities where the council or the elected body is not the decider of a special use permit, like I know in Augusta County, their Board of Zoning Appeals does the conditional use permits, then you do need to write into the ordinance a lot more specifics because they aren't an elected body. But when it is the elected body, like council, making that decision, so I'm just going to give the example of this bed and breakfast. If they came forward and said, we really want to do weddings up to 1,000 people, they're coming and asking for the maximum, and then it's always within the, prerogative of council to say, based on the size of that property and these, what we envision as a small scale event, we really wouldn't want to see more than 200 people. But it also, if you feel like having some kind of a range within, the hard part about putting it in the ordinance is sometimes you get tripped up then if there's, a little bit more or so it can be handled either way, but it would be within council's purview to limit the number of events for each specific case based on the size of the property.
It seems that's probably the safer way to do it because each property is different.
Yep.
My last question is, if I put my pop-up tent up at the 4th of July picnic I have every year, do I need a CUP to do it? Is there a restraint on the size of because do you guys have tents under the temporary structures?
Yeah, so the tent category that came up under the temporary structures is often, if someone wants to have like one of those large kind of white wedding
Right.
tents and that they're expensive to put up and they do require a building permit. And so the thought was if a bed and breakfast wanted to put one of those up and have it be up for 4 or 5 months, that they would be able to do that as long as it was under the 180 days. With all land use, it is a little bit of common sense in terms of, if we were to be getting complaints from a neighbor that you had a, 4th of July event, it would be like, well, that's a private event that people can have on their property. Again, if it was like every weekend it was starting to happen, then that would be when we would say, okay, this seems like it's turned into a,
Venue.
yeah, or it's no longer an accessory to your residential use.
Right.
It has become something more impactful. So that's how we think of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, plus those tents that you're talking about that are normally put up by Central Virginia Rental. or
Sure.
one of- They have all kinds of other requirements too, as far as exit signage, fire extinguishers, the number of people that can be, quote, in the tent, whether it's enclosed
Yeah.
or not.
And they do require a building permit.
Yes, and they do, having been in charge of a few special events at UVA that have used those, I am very familiar with the process to get one of those erected, and it's quite a process. So the little pop-up 10 by 10 that you would buy from Walmart and stick up in your yard is not even in that category.
And, I guess if it provides more of a comfort level to add something kind of, I don't know the exact language, but if something was added to the intent, the purpose and intent section that essentially just says, and we'd have to think about the wording, but something to the effect that, a family event or an event on your private property that is happening on a less consistent basis is obviously not what this is trying to cover. I'm sure we could put some kind of wording in there that, provided everyone a little bit more of a comfort level around that, because that certainly isn't the intent.
But it boils down to every piece of property is different and the intent is different. And at some point, common sense has to step in.
Yeah.
I
We
think-
try hard to use that.
I think we can trust our, at the end of the day, I think we can trust our city councilors to use common
Yeah.
sense.
And do you have any sort of max decibel reader per location?
So the city, and I'm not an expert on this, but the city did recently, this past summer, adopt a noise ordinance. And so the noise ordinance would apply. This would not kind of override that in any way, shape, or form. So we would be making sure that all applicants were aware of what the noise ordinance is. But yes, this would not kind of override those requirements that are in place. So typically, I think it's like a 55, 60 decibel comes to mind from other localities I've seen, but I'm not exactly sure of what the
Well,
city's is.
we did away with the decimal thing because nobody carries decibel meters in your car,
Okay.
So we made it so it was, and I don't remember the distance, but if they can be heard at a certain
Audible.
distance
Yeah.
from a neighboring property and they complain, then our officers can do enforcement action.
Yeah, and I think at 11 o'clock, all noise is supposed to cease anyway, isn't it, Bobby? Ain't it 11 o'clock?
We made it 20, because we got, we're a
Oh,
community of
okay.
shift workers. We did away with times, we did away with that. If it can be
Okay.
heard from a neighboring property at a certain distance, then they can make a complaint and
Okay.
officers can enforce it.
And so with this, we would at least be aware of what the applicant has in mind when it comes to music. And then it could be, if it's if it's really close to some residential property, or if there's not much of a buffer around it and noise would travel pretty easily, then obviously you could make a recommendation to council that, that there be no outdoor music, or that outdoor music stop at a certain time. So even if it's not in the noise ordinance, you can make it, or the council, with your recommendation, can make it more stringent than the noise ordinance by the conditional use permit. So you'd always have that ability.
But at the very least, it's limited by the existing noise.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do just have one more quick follow-up. I know we're talking about it really just approving this, this first step. But this property makes me think about, because there is a school behind it, that if there are events, let's say, during the hours of school, and it could be, this could be in another potential property also, about the noise, and then the other question would be, I know you'd have to have some special application or be able to get, like, if you're serving alcohol there, get that approved also. But again, with the school being so near, that would be, my concern about, that's why I wanted to know what kind of events and, maybe what time of the day and so forth. Because I think the school makes it a little different, and I think, again, you're gonna look at each individual situation, but I wouldn't wanna have something wide open that somebody could, let's say you had a wild party or wild guest, but people, if they get out of hand or something, and you've got young kids, it may not be appropriate.
Yeah, so
I don't know how you handle
Yeah, so we wouldn't, as far as the alcohol permits are concerned, it wouldn't be anything that locally we would handle. If they plan to do that, it would be kind of like any other business through ABC laws or whatever. You could certainly, when they come forward and apply for their permit, you could certainly ask if that's, their intention or interest, but really, the city would kind of be staying out of that in terms of permitting it. But we are requiring them to say the types of events that they're interested in having, the number of people, kind of those things. And you would have, and the times of day and operations, and you would have all of that information up front when you're making your recommendation on whether or not that site is a good site for those types of events.
And would they have to give, it's for 6 events for the year. Would they have to itemize each event and then have that ahead of time, or just?
I think it does come back to an enforcement kind of thing for us. And so that would probably be a decision we would make as we, depending on the number of events. If it was something that was pretty wide open and there wasn't a lot of limitations on, then we would probably let it kind of go and see how it's, working, because a lot of times these events are being held on off hours when, we can't have a zoning officer go out and kind of check on it or whatnot. If it was the case that, like, during a public hearing, there was a lot of, maybe opposition, and there was a lot of, concern on the part of council that, that these events really needed to be limited in size to a certain time, then staff would probably recommend then that the applicant kind of come forward and note the day and time that they're having it. So I think it could vary depending on, and it could always be a condition or a recommendation that they do kind of log the events and when they would be happening.
Any other questions? I think I can open the public hearing. I'm going to open a public hearing for an amendment to City Code Chapter 98 zoning ordinance to add a new primary use for temporary special events. Do we have anyone who needs to come up?
If you all want to speak now as applicants on the text amendment.
You don't have to.
But you don't have to. Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah, you can come up and, it just helps because it's a. Yeah, I mean, I guess.
No pressure at all, but you're in front of about 50 million YouTube followers.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah, the Waynesboro Planning Commission has a hot YouTube.
I'm going to get some thumbs up, right? My name is Dana Mayers, and we have the Heritage Hill Bed and Breakfast on the property. That used to be the Penn property. And we do have a fair amount of land, which is nice, so we don't have any of those issues that would restrain us, according to what they were saying. But we've had a lot of interest from guests, people who've called and said, what a great place to, have a venue to do different things like that. And I think it would be great for the city, too, because I've got a lot of people who come to the B&B who've never been to Waynesboro. It's a good in-between spot, if they're going to Charlottesville for games or college stuff or Harrisonburg or whatever. And so a lot of times it's their first time in Waynesboro. So I think it's some good exposure for the city itself. And I just think it would be something beneficial for our business and something fun, too. I don't know if you have any questions for me specifically about what we want to do, but I don't know if we want to do that tonight, or does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to be clear for everyone that, yes, I mean, this would just be amending the ordinance, but they would be coming back in with a full application where they had kind of prepared all of the
Right.
specifics of what they were interested in for kind of that more formal review. So I think that's just a good point to make, and that, it also gives them time, the ability to do that, and to
Right.
come to you with kind of that well-prepared application for their specific use.
Right.
They were instrumental in kind of coming forward and saying, we really want the ability to be able to do this, and we agreed that we should probably get something in the ordinance that allowed that. And so we've kind of worked back and forth on this. Alice-Ann did a lot of great research from other localities, kind of what are some ways that they've been handling it. Before Waynesboro, I worked for Augusta County, and this is very common. They do the special use permits all the time, all over the county for wedding venues on farms and things like that. And so we kind of put all that knowledge together and came up with this zoning text amendment to start.
So at the end of the day, this is pretty much to help you grow your business to make more people come to our city.
Yes,
Nobody loses.
right, it's a win-win.
That's kind of where I'm at, where it sounds like a great thing. I just want to make sure that this great thing doesn't turn into a bad thing for everyone.
Yeah.
That's,
sounds
yeah,
awesome.
that's the
But-
I
job.
think
there's-
that's
there's a-
what the
there's a
zoning
lot of
text amendment
oversight.
does, is it really
Right.
puts
There's
us.
a lot of oversight.
And yet thankfully with conditional use permits, the council has a significant leeway to kind of make it set any condition in place that they think would help it, fit better with the comprehensive plan, better with the surrounding property. And so it helps it be tailored on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
your work on this. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. I have to say that I feel like this is a pretty forward-thinking and responsive text amendment, zoning text amendment to something that's already going on, and I think it's going to at least give us a leg up on being caught in a situation where there's nebulous clouds of information. At least it gives us a foothold, a toehold on where the world is going. So, and this is where we are and this is what's happening. So I think it's
great.
awesome. I think
Certainly
it's,
better than finding out that it's going on and trying to figure out what to do afterwards when there's a problem.
or
Right, so I-
over policing it under the wrong statute,
So I
you know?
commend the applicants for that.
Yeah.
Getting ahead of it.
So, anybody want to make a motion?
Okay, go ahead,
I
Bob.
was going to say, I'll make a motion that we amend Chapter 98 zoning ordinance to add the new primary use temporary special events permit.
I'll second.
Everyone in favor? Aye. Everyone not in favor? Motion carries. And once again, we are responsive.
And forward thinking.
That's right. Okay, we're ready to move on to number 7. The review of minor subdivisions and final subdivision plats approved since the November 22nd, 2022 meeting.
And I actually don't have any of those for you tonight.
Okay, so we're just going to fly right on past that one. And then we're going to have a review of the resolution to fix the 2023 meeting schedule and implement an inclement weather policy. You can all look at the dates
Okay.
of the fixed schedule.
So this just is a resolution essentially that sets all of your meeting dates for the following year. So it's keeping with our normal practice of when those meetings are held, but just kind of identifying that that's when they would be. Number 2 also just notes that if a work session needs to be held that's not one of these regular meetings, that it will be scheduled in accordance with 15.2.2214 and 2.23707, and those are just open public body meetings that they have to be noted at least so many days before the event on the calendar, and that all of you would be notified. And then the last is in the state code section, it allows planning commissions to be able to set kind of an inclement weather policy, and that just kind of saves us on advertising if the night of a meeting, the weather's bad. This allows for the chair to kind of call that meeting, and it would go to the very next week at the same Tuesday at the same time, and then essentially we just don't have to re-advertise that. So it's noticing to the public that that might happen, and certainly we would update it on our calendars and all of that. And then if approved, we are required to put this in the newspaper of general circulation, so the News Virginian, at least 7 days prior to your first meeting in January, so that we would also do that,
Okay.
so it would be posted. So we just need a motion to approve this resolution and inclement weather policy.
Okay, someone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution for the 2023 meeting schedule and the implementation of an inclement weather policy.
I'll second.
All right, everyone in favor? of said motion?
Aye.
Everyone opposed? Motion carries.
And then we had spoken, I guess, back in October. I think our current bylaws actually speak about electing new officers in October or September. And we were just noting that, you know, we were having some changes with some people going off the commission, and we were waiting for new commissioners to be appointed. And we also think that we need to amend our bylaws anyway, because it's kind of weird to do a September change of
Right.
officers. So we're hoping, you know, maybe by January we can get that ready. The bylaw changes and some things we wanted to note in there, but if not, at least we would like to elect new officers in January. And so mainly tonight, I don't know if there's a certain way that you would like to do that. You know, sometimes it's a committee of two that are kind of like the nominating committee, and, you know, might want to call around and check and see who would like would be interested in those roles, or if you just want to play it by ear that night, it's up to you. I just wanted to make sure you knew that it was something that we will be doing in January.
I think we've just kind of, since I've been here, the last 6 years, we've just kind of said, who wants to do it?
And I'm fine with continuing that. I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure everybody was good as far as that's concerned for January. So we will do election of
Who was our
officers.
vice? Is our vice still here?
So no,
Steve, okay, I thought Steve was the vice.
so
Stephen
the
was the
vice chair is currently vacant.
I've been carrying us.
Yeah,
I have been carrying us.
well, he's been living it up in Ohio.
Them grandbabies.
So we'll do that at the first meeting in January.
Okay. All right, any other business or correspondence, commissioners?
Well, I'd just like to thank Bobby for
I know.
his time on the planning commission that I've been with, and wish him well in his future endeavors.
Thank you, sir.
And you better be back.
Well, and I hope to run into you in Crow again.
Thank you very much. We've appreciated and enjoyed your company
Yep.
Thank you.
on the planning commission.
And I just had one other thing I wanted to note. Community development, we're starting to work on our budget for next fiscal year. And we usually budget for money to send some planning commissioners to the planning commissioner course. I believe it's out of VCU now.
And mostly done online.
And mostly done online. So I plan to do that again. I think my plan is to budget for two to attend the planning commissioner's course. So if we think there's more of an interest than two, let me know and I'll throw in another. But I did just want to let you all know that I will plan to budget for that and travel related to that. And again, most of it's online, so it's not a huge commitment about traveling, but wanted to note that that's a great course, something that we would definitely encourage any of you that would like to participate in it. A lot of good information.
Okay. And then we,
I'll make the final motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll second.
meeting is adjourned. Bobby, don't travel too much.
Yep.
Back and see